Edd Lees of Wildfarmed. Welcome to Brand Growth Heroes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be on.
Yeah, it's fab. So look, we came across you through our sponsor, Strong Roots. Sam Denigan is a big fan. And we were absolutely intrigued, fascinated and inspired by what Wildfarmed is doing and by your mission and your purpose. Can you share with our audience what Wildfarmed is, how it works and what your vision for a new future for the way we farm and the way we eat going forward is?
Yeah, sure. Wildfarmed is a business that is connecting farmers growing grain currently in regenerative fashion to customers via bakeries or hopefully soon directly as well. So giving people on the street and food businesses the opportunity to participate in sponsoring land restoration.
Wow. Okay. So you said a couple of things that we might need to explain. So talk to us about, so you give farmers the opportunity who are growing crops grain crops in a regenerative way. You give them a marketplace, basically. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. We're our route to market for the farmers. So we have a farming community who grow in a way that is benefiting soil regeneratively, we like to say.
Yeah.
And then we collate that grain together, we mill it into flour, and we sell it currently to bakeries and restaurants as flour. And we've done a couple of other small projects where we've collaborated with a gin company to do a gin, a beer company to do a beer made with the grain. And we've got some other ones in the food space coming very soon. And
so the bread that these bakeries or the bread products or products that they make with the wild-farmed grain, they generally will then brand that particular product or label it as a wild-farmed product?
Yes, they'll do some version of that, or somewhere in the shop or wherever it may be, their outlet, tell the story that they are part of this community, that they're helping to move this movement along. So it could be a sticker in a window, it could be Instagram posts, it could be something on their website. It could be, like you say, just the name on the loaf if they're not. A lot of our customers are not exclusively using our flour. They are using many different ones, but some of the places that are 100% wild farm, they might do it in a slightly different way.
Okay. And are there actually bakeries that are 100% wild farmed flour?
Yes, there are. Yeah.
So give us some names of famous bakeries in London that people might aspire to go and visit one day.
Well, Jolene is a very good example, who were our first partners that we worked with. And that's a great but long story, perhaps for another day. But they have from the beginning been a bakery and restaurant. And now I think they have 5 bakeries, 4 or 5 little outlets. And they've been 100% wild farmed in the bread, the pizza, the pasta, all the sweet stuff. Another great example, and Jolene started from day one as wild farmed. Okay. Another great example is sourdough Sophia. And Sophia was, she started baking in lockdown for her neighbors, and they really liked what she was doing. She wasn't using wild farmed at all at this point. And then she's a real Instagram/lockdown success, who has built a business with a fantastic shop in Crouch End. And I believe she might be about to do another, as well as having her second child. She's a bit of a superwoman. And she slowly moved over to Wild Farm, gradually. She just started doing a bit, and then a bit more and a bit more. So that's another one in London. Then in Sheffield, there is Marmaduke's Cafe, which is and bakery, which is an absolutely beautiful site, if anybody's ever around there, run by an amazing lady called Claire and her family. And again, they started from scratch with Wild Farm. And it's worth mentioning, and this may link into something else you want to talk about. There is a cost implication to buying our product. It does cost more than many of the other comparative products. And so it takes a really big step for an existing business to retrofit our product into it, because it's going to increase their production costs. So those who've done that, incredibly brave. Those who've done it from the off, perhaps even more brave in a different way.
Well, look, that is the very reason that we got you on the show, is because I've been looking for a while, for probably 2 years now, for someone to explain to me what regenerative farming is, or how farming in regenerative manner can be, and whether or not it is something that is economical for the farmers, and actually if there's a business case for, large consumer goods companies or scaling consumer goods brands to use these products and these ingredients in their products, as much as possible, so that we can really make an impact on soil health and on the planet. Can you bring us back right to the very beginning as to how this all started,
Yes,
the journey
sure.
that you've been on with your co-founder and Andy Cato?
Yes.
And just, particularly tell us about the community of people who are now on this journey with you, because it's really quite big.
Yeah, it's and growing. Yeah, and I think we'll come on to it in a minute, but it is important that we get some definitions right. But we'll come to that later, I guess. And Andy's story and the Wildfarmed story is a long one, and it's a great story. But I'll do it quickly. It's all over the internet for people who want to Google it. But Andy was previously a musician. He was one half of Armada, and he, I think, 17 years ago, he happened upon an article on the way back from a gig one day about modern agriculture and chemical-based agriculture and all the problems that are associated with that. And at the end of this article, there was a wonderful piece of journalism that said, if you don't like the system, don't depend on it. And Andy's response to that was to start growing vegetables at home, where he lived in France at the time, having never had a pot plant before in his life. And fast forwarding through an awful lot of
challenges
and heartache and challenges, he ended up buying a farm. The farm he'd bought as a 6'9" English DJ, the farm that the French will sell to you, isn't the best farm in France. It was basically almost sort of technically dead in terms of organic matter. It'd been an intensive maize farm for 20 years, sprayed to within an inch of its life. And Andy sort of hopelessly, naively attempted some version of organic agriculture on there, having never been a farmer before, knowing anything about how to drive a tractor or the rest of it. And it failed. It failed time and time again. He couldn't get any sort of a sensible crop out of it. And he was about to throw in the towel, and he came across a book by a chap called Albert Howard, who was one of the founders of what today we call regenerative agriculture, but it wasn't called that in the 50s or whenever he wrote it. And the basic premise of that book is, in nature, we have a diversity of animals and plants in the same place at the same time. And when we start to separate that diversity and go into monocultures in a field without animals, that's when you take a beautiful solution and create myriad problems.
Okay.
And so Andy covered his entire farm in a variety of covered crops. He bought a herd of cattle, having never had a cat or a dog in his life, and was financially very stretched at this time. And as his one last roll of the dice, this is what he did. And his land, in a remarkable period of time, started to look much more like the healthy black soil that we would associate with farming than some of this kind of like, dust bowls that he will, the sort of dusty dirt that he had been operating with before. And so at that point, he thought, this is how I want to be growing things. I don't want to I don't want to go backwards now. I don't want to plow the thing up. And I don't really want to go down into his whole story and no dig and heritage grains and all these things that he experimented with. And farming by horse and cart, was one of the things that he did for a number of years. But I think the point of what Andy took out of that, and what the whole of Wildfarmed is based on, is those however many few inches of topsoil are what the whole of life depends on Earth. And topsoil is the only thing that can take death and turn it into life. When a tree falls off, a leaf falls off a tree, and a seed is planted in the ground, soil's the only thing that can make that grow again. And so absolutely everything we do is fundamentally driven by what is the best thing that we can do for making arable farming as soil positive as possible.
Okay, so how did you meet Andy, and how did Wildfarmed come about?
So there's a third co-founder who's a guy called George Lamb, who used to he's a very close friend of mine and was also a friend of Andy's. And I'd been following Andy's stories third hand via George, And there was a fateful story where I was in George's car with him one day, and they were talking on the phone. And Andy was saying, "This is a disaster. I finally figured out how to grow this grain, but when I've gone to sell it, like into the local grain dealer or commodity market, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't. The price they'll give me for it doesn't reflect any of the things I've done. There is no." They don't care. Like that's how commodity markets work. Which obviously,
Sure.
my background is in finance, so I was in the car and said, "What you need to do, Andy, is you need to travel down the value chain to extract some more of the value that you've added, because growing this way is, it's dealing with a whole load of what economists call externalities. So whether that's in the environment or in the health service or in communities." And he'd added all this and his product, but actually commodity markets operate with completely fungible items. So they don't care in the slightest if it's being grown beautifully regeneratively. 1 ton of grain within certain categories equals 1 ton of grain, whether no matter what you did to it.
Okay, so you this inspired you in some way, did it? And how did you end up working together?
Exactly. I had a terribly boring job in finance, and I was always doing other side projects. And I said, I can help you with this. So what I did was I helped Andy set up an on-site mill and bakery on his farm. And I helped him find a baker, who was a girl I was introduced to in London, who is an incredibly talented baker, who took some persuading to go and visit for the weekend. And she went for the weekend and stayed 6 months. She was so inspired.
Wow.
And she and Andy together developed this bakery product and opened this little shop in town, in the tiny little town that Andy lived in, that had some existing classic sort of French boulangerie. On the second weekend, there was a queue for bread for the first time in that town since 1945, of mostly old people saying, "This is what bread used to taste like."
Okay, amazing. So where is it now? Where is Wildfarmed now? Describe what the community and the marketplace and the products are like now, and how do you all work together?
Yeah, so the community is, and I've been told off for quoting this number incorrectly a few times recently, so I apologize if it's not entirely right, but I believe it's 42 farmers. It might be 41 or it might be 43. Mostly, I think 30, between either 35, I think, are in the UK and 8 in France, but it might be 38 and 5. Mm-hmm. So we have a small community in France around where Andy used to live. And there's actually one last relevant piece of the story, which is in mid-2019, George, Andy and I had this conversation about Andy's farm now works very nicely. He's won all sorts of awards for the work he's done. But if you zoom out, it's a little green postage stamp of a flourishing ecosystem surrounded by big brown open air factories with farmers who either don't have the opportunity or the inclination to do what Andy did. And our conclusion was, if we wait for every farm to have on it an on-site bakery, an on-site butcher, an on-site cider press, we're going to run out of ecological road. So our decision was to scale the Wildfarmed project, and that meant getting more farmers who could supply for us, growing in a way that is benefiting soil. So
like a co-op for...
A bit like a co-op, yeah. It's like a community, we call it. But yes, right. Exactly. And the Wildfarmed community today is this 38 farmers in the UK and the guys in France who we originally started it with, because Andy was getting a bit more from people in, not just on his farm, from his neighbours in France. And they will grow for us under a variety of different protocols, that all of which we believe are benefiting soil health and ecosystems. And they will then sell to us at the end. Well, we pre-agree prices. Why do we pre-agree prices? Because we're trying to de-risk the farmer. This is an important part of when I started looking at this business with my finance background, was chemical or traditional green agriculture is a business where at the beginning of the year, you don't know how much it's going to cost you to produce the goods you're producing because of the various volatility of input prices. You don't know how much yield you're going to get. So you don't know how much product you're going to have. And then you don't know how much you're going to be able to sell it for at the end of the year. So that's like the least investable business model I could possibly design.
Totally.
It's literally, if it was written in a, in a university exam,
you'd never do it.
It'd be too simplistic.
The only reason people are doing it is because I presume that, they've got a love of the land and the farm, and it's been in their family for generations, or they've gone into it and maybe not knowing that it's very, very difficult to make a living out of it, right?
Yeah, I don't think many of them are in it for the money. The farmers who I've got to know are just some of the most incredibly smart people who I've ever met, and the ingenuity and the adaptability and the instinct and the calm nerves and the strong hands and all of these things at the same time. Andy's did in a podcast recently, farmers should be the rock stars, not the other way around. And
that's
that is
amazing.
Absolutely 100% true. Like I've been a complete eye opener for me, the people I've met, especially given some of the people I used to work with in the city, mind blowing.
So come back to this idea that you have guaranteed them their prices. So they go into this saying, right, I'm going to take a bit of a risk, producing grain in a way that I know is going to cost me more money, particularly for the first few years. There's going to be a transition phase, as you said to me on our pre-call, and you can maybe talk us through that. It's going to cost me some more money, but at least I know I'm going to be guaranteed a return. Can I just ask, how do you guys afford to do that?
Well, there's two things there. One, it doesn't cost them more money, actually. It costs them much less money because they don't have any input costs.
Okay.
So our whole thing is focused on net margin. So we spend an awful lot of time within the growing community getting a feel for what is the correct price to make sure that the farmer has a competitive net margin with doing what he would have been doing in the chemical world, because otherwise it's not going to be scalable.
Yeah.
And then how do we do that? Well, I'm agreeing deals. I've agreed a bunch of deals now for harvest 2023, which is product that will sell in the year of 2024. So we have a good eye line on what we're going to get, when we're going to get, before we get it. And while we might be absolutely, in absolute terms, more expensive than the next product, what we are is absolutely reliable in price. And a little anecdote on that is one of our big pizza customers came to us recently and said, the Italian pizza flour that I've been using for years, which is one of the better known ones, have just put their price up to me by 50% because they're buying all of their grain from the anonymous commodity markets, and the situation in the Ukraine has meant that the price of wheat's gone up. And this is something that we're insulated to because we're a decentralized system. We don't rely upon that. We have to have prices that stack up for the farmer.
What about if you don't have supply though? What if supply doesn't happen?
Well, I have 18 months eye line on that. Okay. So we have an idea. We have to manage that like any business. Yeah. And if there was to be, like a brutal late winter in May in the UK, across the whole of the UK, that would definitely be an issue. But we have growers from Cumbria and north of North Yorkshire all the way down to Cornwall. And we also have some growers in France still. Okay. So for sure, it's a business risk to us, but that would be one that we would just have to manage like any other.
One of the things that I couldn't make sense of when I was trying to understand regenerative agriculture, and again, with my hat on, and how do I bring this message to the food industry, to anyone who, listens to the podcast or listens to any of my updates on or sees any of my updates on LinkedIn. And the reason I haven't talked about it before was because I couldn't get to the bottom of, was it commercially viable for anyone for any farmers and at the input level to get involved in this type of agriculture? And then was there a market for it? And were you going to have to, charge a humongous price for your bread or a humongous price for your biscuits if you used flour grown in this way? But you guys are proving that there is a market for it, and that farmers are willing to get into bed with you guys and grow their grain in this way, sell it to you, and then you can sell it on to bakeries who will bake with it. Does the bread that those bakeries bake cost more than other bread, or would it cost more anyway because they're the kind of bakeries who sell expensive bread?
That's a really good question. I think probably the latter at the moment, but there's quite a lot in what you just said there.
Sorry.
That was a really good three questions. Absolutely, that's the case at the moment, but that can't be the case long term. I'm not interested in this being a I think, because the world does not, like for just that community, because the world doesn't need the £4 loaf of sourdough.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a question about the true cost of food, which I touched on before. Like there's an awful lot of food out there that's not paying its bills. Like I say, whether that's in the fields or in the environment or in the health service or in flood risk or all of these things. There's regenerative agriculture has to be the future, because depending on who you believe, there's somewhere between 10 and 40 harvests left before we reach terminal soil decline. That's not in question. The only real question is, there's two sort of approaches to it. One is what they call sustainable intensification, which is we'll find better chemicals, like the silver bullet, which I think comes with a healthy dose of wishful thinking on energy prices personally. Or you find a way where you work in harmony with nature, with nature's abundance rather than against it. And it touches on something that we almost talked about earlier, which is, without a doubt, the yields are going to be a little bit lower, they are. And there's a question as to how much, but they are going to be a bit lower. Then it becomes a question of, well, would you rather have a yield that's 75% of the conventional yield forever, or a conventional yield that is ever decreasing? Those diminishing returns are well established and irrefutable. Would you rather have those for between 10 and 40 years? So we have to do something. People are doing things, and we have to do things. As regards to the customers, I think if you walk into any supermarket and look at every single product on every single shelf, in 50 years' time, it will come from a regenerative system. So without a doubt, the market's there for it.
So how do you scale this? How do you jump between where you are now with Wildfarmed and, Unilever and Nestle using grain from regeneratively farmed practices in the wafer of a double-decker?
Yeah, well, there's two really good points in there. And how do we scale it? Well, that's our own business challenge, but I'm really happy with the interest we've got from our growing community, from our business community, as in our customers have gone from being independent bakeries and restaurants, privately owned, to now we're starting to talk to more chains. And by the back end of this year, our products will be featured in nationwide chains. And I think that's fantastic. Will
it be branded on the menu, or will people see that? Absolutely. To be fair, there's no point in them not doing that, because it's going to cost them double what it would cost them to buy their one from. And these are chains that we all know.
Absolutely, 100%.
That is amazing news.
Yeah, it's super exciting. There's always going to be a few people along the way who have been in this community for a very long time, who don't like the fact, they think that we're another big faceless organization, but I can't worry too much about that, because our plan is to share our story of who our growers are, who we are, talk about it. And on to your point about Nestle, I read just yesterday or the day before that Nestle are planning to use regenerative wheat in their shredded wheat going forward.
Oh, really?
I can't remember the details of it, and I think they're growing it themselves.
Okay.
But the fact that they're doing this it tells you everything you need to know. Yeah. And that might lead us into a point we almost talked about at the beginning, which is, what's the definition of regen? Because a very smart person said to me recently that you need to belong to a category for everybody to understand who you are. And I've been reflecting on that and absolutely 100% agree. But I think that
I've been feeling bad about giving you that head bashing. Sorry.
No, I think it's fantastic bit of advice, because then it has to make sense. And then what we have to do is figure out where we sit within that, because there's soft drinks and there's soft drinks. There's Coca-Cola, and then there's like sparkling water with the fresh orange. Is it Dash they're called? With Dash, the fresh orange. That they use the fruit that was going to be
the wonky fruit.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. But they're all still soft drinks, right? So you have to decide where you want to sit.
They're great guys, actually, farming backgrounds, big farming backgrounds. And if you want an intro.
I met one of them at an event. He was a lovely guy, and he actually, the same event, the CEO of Coca-Cola was there.
Wow.
And the young guy, I forget his name, was asking him quite some challenging questions.
I'd say he was. They're fab. I mean, they're so successful. They've done an amazing job, particularly with their D2C business and then their retail business laterally. Really, really fab. So we talked about this a little bit. Big food is going to get onto this bandwagon. There's probably a really big risk of what we call greenwashing on this. I can just imagine, this is this is made from regenerative farming practices, but yet there isn't a definition, is there, of regenerative farming practices? Talk to us a little bit about this so that people can go away having a good idea of what regenerative farming practices actually are and what definitions there aren't available and what definition does there need to be.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, how would I describe? So regenerative has to be something that is increasing the natural abundance in the soil, which can be measured by soil organic matter, but there's a number of other different ways to measure it, increase diversity. But that's very hard to measure year on year is the thing. You can't just say, I did this and look, it's better this year. It's not a linear thing. It can take any period of time, but there's
or cycles, periods of cycles, right?
Exactly. And it doesn't, and we like to measure things and outcomes. You see, that's how we operate. It's what we're used to.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example is, we've taken on a farm near Peterborough that's previously been a potato and onion farm for one of the big supermarkets, and it is an ecological desert. There's not a tree in sight. There's no bugs in the soil, nothing. And we put it all into a system this year, but it'll take many years to get it where it needs to be.
Okay.
But very interestingly, the people who sponsored this project, whose land it's on, have bought the field right next to where we're doing this, that's been in a cover crop sprayed aggressively with herbicides for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. And that absolutely could be called regenerative. People say, if you're using cover crops, that's regenerative. In our definition, which is the Wildfarmed one, anything with the word side in it, be it a pesticide, a herbicide, an insecticide, side means death, and we decided to kill, is Latin. So anything that's killing things, by definition in our book, can't be regenerating things. So how do we measure the outcomes? I'm not sure. I think we have to go into it, and we go into it with our system of there's absolutely nothing with the word side used. In our community, we filter for mindset. So everybody in there wants to improve soil year on year. So there's an awful lot of use of different cover crops, integrating animals where possible. It's the thing I said right at the beginning. Diversity is the name of the game. So not using monocrops, as many different types of plant in the field at the same time.
So what kind of questions when we are reaching a tipping point with this, where it's getting into the mass market or the top end of the mass market in terms of, what Big Food Co is doing, what kind of questions should listeners be asking themselves when they're reading back a pack or they're clicking on website pages? Mm-hmm. What should they be looking out for? What are the watch outs? Yeah,
exactly. For me, it's anything with sides. I think we, through the use of Web3 and blockchain, and whether it's on blockchain or not, sort of irrelevant really, but with the use of Web3, we can tell our customers a lot. I think the pack is going to become what the Instagram page was in Web2. Okay. I think we've all got used to scanning a QR code. I'm not going to walk around the supermarket scanning every single one, but I think there has to be a headline of what you as a business think is what's making your thing regenerative. Ours is increasing organic matter year on year and never using any of the sides. And a lot of people say to us, well, how are you that different to a lot of standard organic brands then? Which is, again, a reasonable question. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to that we're filtering for mindset. We're going in with a paradigm of we're trying to improve soil health, whereas organic is going in with we don't want to use any chemicals whatsoever. Now, a lot of our farmers cross over, and they're both. The head of the Soil Association in the UK, Helen Browning, is one of our growers and is a dear friend of our business. So, there's not a question of, organic is this and regen is this and everyone else is bad. Sure. I would just look for what chemicals are being used.
But how will I know that if I'm looking at a shredded wheat pack in 2 years' time and it said that it's made with regenerative grain that is grown with regenerative blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I won't know what pesticides they've used.
No, exactly. And I think it's a huge challenge in the same way you can go into a supermarket and you see a sourdough loaf and it's got 1% sourdough in it. It's terrible. Nothing sourdough about it. It's just
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a guy who I can introduce you to who has a thing called the Real Bread Campaign.
I
And
know
he
him.
talks a
Yeah.
lot about sourdough and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
In fact, I don't know him, but a good friend of mine here on the Isle of Man is a massive fan and talks about him all the time. And they're part of that. They're part of the Real Bread Campaign.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation where I think, and again, the lever that we're going with is brand. And if you're a trusted brand, you're a trusted brand. You know what Coca-Cola stands for. You know what Nike stands for. Warts and all, you know what what Apple stands for. And none of these businesses I've just said are faultless. When we talk about what kind of business do we want to be like, we start with Patagonia, and then there's quite a lot of fresh air, to be perfectly honest. So I think there's a new type of business like Strong Roots, who I think deserves a shout out, like there's another bunch of guys called Grassroots, whether it's Hodmadods, there's a bunch of young businesses that are coming soon. And I feel like this is early to mid 90s in tech, where these names that are not known at all today will be absolutely household names in the next 10 to 15 years. And ideally hope that Wildfarmed is one of them, but whether it's us or not, absolutely, I believe that'll be the outcome.
And what makes them all similar is they all have the same values in terms of the way in which they want to do business, better the soil and the planet, and the way in which they're going to show up transparently.
I think that's the key word. I think the transparency is absolutely the key to it. And I think not through any malintent, I just think it's extremely difficult for big businesses to retrofit that. Yeah. And I think small businesses can hard code it from the beginning.
Absolutely. Before we sign off, we were talking about how you guys are going to scale your business, and we said that towards the end of this year you're going to be part of some national change, which is really exciting. What's then the next big phase after that?
Well, we were just talking about brand, and you know a lot about brands, and even you knowing about brands, there's not many household name ingredient brands. So I think if we are to evolve into a household name, it needs to be as a food business. And I think, again, another tenet on which Wildfarmed is built is collaboration and cooperation. So I imagine that for us, it will be a series of collaborations with people who really know an awful lot about their area to do Wildfarmed times, whether it may be products. We've done some little bits of it already with Willie's Pies guys, who've had a great success story powered by Wildfarmed. We have a donut one coming down the track, but I'm not allowed to talk too much about it just yet.
Okay.
And we have a bunch of others, from ramen noodles to pizza dough to all sorts of stuff. And I think collaborating together with what each of us is good at and losing that sort of 20th century mindset of proprietary and just collaboration and abundant rather than scarcity mindset is going to be a characteristic of it.
So is there an invitation implicit in that? I mean, do you want to hear from any businesses who use grain in their ingredients deck?
Would love to.
Let's do the call out.
Yeah, that's it. I would love that. That is a call out with, I think anybody who's using wheat in anything. And I also say to the big businesses as well, it's very difficult for very big businesses to we couldn't supply a small fraction of them, but if they were to pledge to committing a certain percentage over time of their supply, that would have a huge effect on changing the landscape of the UK. We talk about our North Star is turning brown fields greener, or, making people farm wilder, whatever you want to call it. And if one of the sort of big 4 or 5 supermarkets change over 2% of their supply to whether it's us or another set of people doing things similar to us, that's a massive lever on this. So everybody's welcome. Everyone should do their bit. I
think they're all scared of it. Can they come to you to learn about it?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And the onus is on us to make it easy for them.
Yeah,
this is their thing to say, this is it. Come in here. These are the things we can definitely say. These are the things that we think are important to your customer. Someone gave me a lovely phrase the other day that said, the next big food trend post-veganism is going to be the climatarian. And I think the job for me in my position and the other people, my peers and other businesses, is to make sure that this movement doesn't become like vegetarianism in the 80s. and it becomes more like electric cars in the last few years, that for some reason it caught the cultural zeitgeist, I hate that word, but either way, caught just a cultural phenomenon, and people wanted to be part of it, to show off that they're part of it.
What about Prince Charles and Prince Harry? I mean, not that I'm a royalist in any way, shape or form, but they do a lot of good work in this field. Boom, boom.
Prince Charles was light years ahead of people on this stuff. Yeah. So and again, if the future King of England
is listening,
I would. Yeah, if you're listening, that could be one more decent.
Yeah, a patron of Wildfarmed.
Exactly.
Why not? I know he wants to do a lot more in this area, so why not? Yeah. Look, I've really enjoyed learning some great things from you over the last week or two. Thank you so much for taking me on this journey, and for our listeners today. It's a really complex subject, but you guys have grabbed the bull by the horns and decided to try and make an economically viable model for something that nobody else has been brave enough to grasp, or clever enough, actually. I think the key thing that you mentioned there was this guaranteed price, because before that was there, then it just didn't work for anyone. So it took maybe that external profession. I suppose your professional background in a different sphere, which is in finance, and that's really interesting, isn't it? How you can bring a skill and a piece of knowledge from somewhere else, and yeah. So look, thank you so much, Edd Lees from Wildfarmed. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.